supposed to resign. There's turmoil, internal disturbances in the country.
So, I'm sorry, what's the question?
Question is, what's your reaction to the allegations?
So, we have had no involvement at all. Any reports or rumors that the United States government was involved in these events is simply false. That is not true. This is a choice for and by the Bangladeshi people. We believe that the Bangladeshi people should determine the future of the Bangladeshi government, and that's where we stand. Any allegations, certainly we will continue to say, and I have said here, is simply untrue.
Secondly, over the weekend, several Hindu American groups held a protest march in front of the White House, urging the president that he should be taking some steps to stop the atrocities against Hindus in the Bangladesh. And also two of the Hindu lawmakers, Radha Krishnamurti and Sri Thaneda, who both are from the Democratic Party, they have also written letters to the administration seeking their help in stopping atrocities against Hindus in Bangladesh and other minority groups.
So look, we're going to continue certainly to monitor the situation. I don't have anything else to add to say beyond that. But when it comes to any type of human rights issues here, the president has been very consistent in speaking loud and clear in public and also privately. Don't have anything, and he'll continue to do that, but don't have any specific engagement to speak to at this time.
One question on India. As President plans to, for the next 6 months, what are the unfinished agenda on his India-US relationship and also on Quad?
So look, the president views our relationship, the United States relationship with India, as one of the most consequential in the world. And so we work closely with India on our most vital priorities, including through the Quad and the U.S.-India initiative on this critical and emerging technology. And so we look forward to continuing to expand our critically important partnership and how it's going to benefit the American people. And we want to create more prosperous and secure Indo-Pacific and the world. And so that is going to continue to be our focus as we move forward. Okay. All right.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier the president's push to reform the Supreme Court, term limits and ethics requirements. Can you talk about what the plan is to achieve that once Congress comes back? Are you laying the groundwork in any way at this point or otherwise trying to get that across the finish line?
So look, the president laid out 3 ways that he wants to see that moving forward. And he did that in his Washington Post op-ed and certainly when he was in Austin, Texas about 3 weeks ago. And so we laid out our ideas and our thoughts. Some of them, if you think about term limits, you've seen conservative experts also agree with us on that, how there should be term limits. And so what we're going to do is have the conversation with Congress when they get back and figure out ways how we can actually get this done, because it is important. The president believes no one is above the law, and that is something that he has continued to talk about and will do so, and that includes the highest court in the land. And what we have seen from the highest court in the land is not normal. You heard the president say that. It is not normal. And so we're going to work with Congress, come up with some ways to deal with this, to really address SCOTUS reform, and he wants to see it done in a bipartisan way. We think it's possible.
Is he at all doing anything to lay the groundwork now before Congress comes back, looking for allies in Congress or otherwise taking any concrete steps?
So nothing to read out. Obviously, we do keep any conversations private. But what we want to do is certainly see legislation to deal with what we've been seeing, which what I just said, which is it's not normal from SCOTUS. And so his team will have conversations with congressional members on how to best move forward. I don't have any meetings or anything to read out at this time.
Thank you.
Got it in the back. Go ahead. Yep.
Thanks. The Trump campaign said over the weekend that it's been hacked. Is the White House concerned about election integrity? And do you have any response to reports that Iran was the source of the hack?
So look, I would have to refer you to the Department of Justice and the FBI on that particular questions. We've said many times that this administration strongly condemns any foreign government or entity who attempts to interfere in our electoral process or seeks to undermine confidence in our democratic institution. And so we take this type of reports of such activity extremely seriously. And so again, we do not tolerate this type, anything like this, influence or interference efforts. And we have made that very clear with foreign actors that such influence or interference is unacceptable. And our efforts to protect our elections have grown significantly over the years, even as the threat landscape has become increasingly complicated. But for this particular question, I would have to refer you to the Department of Justice and FBI. I cannot comment on the veracity of the claims that Iran was involved.
Thanks. And one more. As a member of the administration, can we expect the Vice President to come out here and speak to the American people in the briefing room at some point?
The President and the Vice President speaks to the American people regularly, and that's where I'll leave that. Good, sir, right there.
Thank you. What is the U.S. the administration is doing in regards to Iran planning to deliver hundreds of ballistic missiles to Russia? I mean, what mechanism are you using to stop that? And then I have another question on Venezuela.
So, look, the White House repeatedly warned of the deepening security partnership between Russia and Iran since the outset of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We've also warned both parties about further strengthening this partnership. This partnership threatens European security and illustrate how Iran's destabilizing influence reaches beyond the Middle East, but also around the world. As we and our partners have made clear to the world, both at the G7 and NATO summits this summer, together we are prepared to deliver a swift and severe response if Iran were to move forward with such transfers, which would represent a dramatic escalation in Iran's support for Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. During his campaign, the Iranian president claimed he wanted to moderate Iran's policies and engage with the world. Destabilizing actions like this fly in the face, certainly, of that rhetoric.
Venezuela, there's a report by Wall Street Journal that the U.S. has offered Maduro and his close allies an amnesty in exchange for them leaving power. Is that
So
something
since
you
the
would confirm?
July 28 elections, we have not made any specific offers of amnesty to Maduro or others.
Can I follow up, Karine?
Sure.
How about before the election?
What I can
Because
say.
there are information that this offer was made, started last year, this discussion of amnesty.
What I can say is, what I can speak to is since the election, we have just not made that type of offer.
Another one on Venezuela, and then I have one on the Middle East, very quick one.
Sure.
What is the view of the two statements from Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico asking Maduro regime to release the voting data? Is this enough, or you would like to see these three countries doing more?
I mean, look, it's been 2 weeks after the elections in Venezuela. It is abundantly clear, right, to the majority of Venezuelan people, the United States, and growing number of countries, as you just listed, that Edmundo won the most votes in the July 28th presidential election, and Maduro must recognize it. We've said that, and we'll continue to say that. More than 80% of the voting tally sheets published by civil society and opposition corroborated by independent observers, and so we think Maduro must recognize it.
Is this statement helpful? Is a good step?
I mean, look, we certainly are going to continue to be very clear here that Maduro must recognize it. Countries are going to do what they feel is the right way to move forward, so we'll let them speak to that. But we've been very clear. Maduro must recognize it.
Another one, last one about the Middle East, because earlier John Kirby said that Iran could attack Israel this week. Does the White House believe an attack is inevitable?
I'm not going to get into our intelligence from here or what another country is going to do. That is not something that I'm going to do from this podium. You heard from NSC, so I will leave it to them to speak to that and what my colleague said, John Kirby said. I just don't have anything else to add. Okay. Go ahead, Ed.
Thanks, Ruth. I want to follow up first on what you told Phil. So you said the vice president owns the successes of this president over the past 3.5 years. Does she also own the struggles that this president's seen, like the prices up 19% since the month they came into office?
They're partners in how they've been able to turn around the economy. This economy was in a downfall when the president took office. The former administration did not have a plan to deal with the pandemic, a comprehensive plan. This president put that forward with the help of the vice president, and we were able to deliver on that. The American Rescue Plan made a difference in bringing our economy back on its feet, made a difference on opening small businesses, on opening schools. Republicans didn't vote for it. We have to remember what the president inherited from the last administration when he took it over with the vice president. And when you think about inflation, inflation is down by 2.5%, and wages have risen. We have more than 16 million jobs created in the last almost 4 years. I know that you're laying out the negative parts of what you foresee, right? What you see in the economy, but there's some data here that has shown, because of the work that this president has done, it's mattered. Unemployment is still low, 4.3%. You think about manufacturing jobs that have come back to this country. You think about how the GDP grew by 2.8% last quarter. Those are that data. And we understand that American people are still feeling it. And that's why we're going to make more announcements about how we're going to continue to lower costs.
One more. I want to try one more time on the taxes on tips. So why then have the president and vice president not talked about this over the past 3.5 years?
So again, the president supports eliminating taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers. And at the same time, what this president and this vice president has been able to do is help raising minimum wage. There are things that the president and this vice president has done over the 3.5 years that has helped hardworking people that Republicans in Congress have opposed. I didn't even talk about them wanting to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, these are things that they have said that will hurt hardworking people. So the president supports it. This is part of the vice president's policy. This is something that we want to see happen, but we have done the work to make sure that hardworking people are not forgotten. Where were Republicans on this? But where were Republicans on this? And if they were so interested, right, if Republicans are now talking about this, if Republicans elected officials are so interested in getting it done, why didn't they pass it during the last administration? Why? Why not?
So the IRS last month released their report saying, hey, this is how, if you have an extension for taxes, you can file taxes on your tips. The president's budget relies on the taxes from tips. So when did this idea come about?
I don't have a timeline for you. What I can say is the president supports this. What I can say, even if you put this to the side, right, which is, again, the president supports this, the vice president supports this, the vice president has done the work to try to make sure that we put working people first. They have had the backs of the working people. Tax cuts for workers, right? Making sure that middle-class families are put first, not billionaires and corporations. That is something that they've been very clear about. Ensuring workers join a union, something that Republican officials oppose. And we've been very clear here. And why haven't Republicans joined us? They just haven't. They have not. Matter of fact, they opposed a lot of the policies that we put forth that would do just this. They opposed it. American Rescue Plan, Inflation Reduction Act, they opposed it. All right, everybody, thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow. No, not tomorrow. We're traveling. I'll see you on the road tomorrow.